Hey guys, Drew here, and today I'm going to be telling you about emergency funds, why you need one, what it is, and how to maximize it. So to get started, an emergency fund is essentially a stash of cash that you have set aside in the event that you have an emergency come up. It's estimated that 40% of Americans could not cover a $400 unexpected expense or emergency if they had to right now. And this is really dangerous because if an emergency comes up that you're not able to cover, you don't have very many options if you don't have money set aside, and oftentimes people get suckered into having to get high interest loans, whether that be through a credit card or a personal loan. And taking on these types of loans, while it may put a band-aid on the problem for now, it's only going to make the problem worse when that inevitable next emergency comes around, and now they're still paying 17 or higher % interest rate on it. This is something that we really need to try and circumvent by saving ahead of time and focusing on how to maximize that savings. So when we're trying to determine what an emergency is, the number one financial emergency that people have to worry about is job loss. And currently, the average person that goes out of work and is looking for a job is going to be out of work for approximately 3 months. And this average depends on the specific industry that you're in, but the median overall is putting you at 3 months without pay. This can be devastating for someone's financial plans when there are so many people living paycheck to paycheck and still saddled with student loans, medical bills, and other kinds of debt. Because of the likelihood of a lengthy period of unemployment, financial advisors generally suggest that you try to save up between 3 to 6 months of your living expenses. This is looking at not necessarily the expenses that you are going if you're, balling on a budget. This is more if you're looking at things like housing, utilities, transportation, and food. General necessities that are fixed costs that you are going to have to spend during the time that you are still looking for a job. If saving up 3 to 6 months of just your rent seems like an insurmountable goal to you, look at making smaller goals along the way. A good suggestion is to start by trying to save just $1,000 in an emergency fund that you aren't going to touch otherwise, and then gradually adding on to it as you're able to. This way you get started with building the habit of having an emergency fund without having the pressure of saving up so much more. You'd be surprised how much this $1,000 will save you in the event that you have an emergency, because of the fact that you will not have to get a high interest loan to cover that short-term cost. So some things to keep in mind whenever you make an emergency fund. First and foremost, an emergency fund needs to be liquid. This way you can access it when you need it, not have it locked up for a set amount of time when an emergency is going to happen when you least expect it. Preferably it needs to be earning an interest so that way inflation's not eating into your entire emergency fund while it's sitting there ready to protect you when you need it. And also preferably it needs to be separate from your checking account. So as an example, if you have direct deposit that goes into a bank account, I highly suggest that your emergency fund goes in a savings account that is not directly attached or linked to that checking account. This way, the chances of you eating into that emergency fund are much, much lower than if you have it attached to your checking account. So based on these needs and preferences with an emergency fund, there are 4 main things you should not do with an emergency fund. First and foremost, do not invest in an emergency fund, because this is going to kind of defeat the purpose of having an emergency fund. If you invest it into, say, the stock market or even into bonds, you're putting it into a vehicle that, yes, in long term is going to grow more than if you put it in a savings account. However, it's highly variable, and if, say, the market goes down and because of this you end up losing your job and you're out of work for 3 months and there's nobody hiring in your field because the market's down, you also can't pull out your investment because your investment is going to be down. So it kind of is going to defeat the entire purpose of an emergency fund. So absolutely, no uncertain terms, do not invest your emergency fund. Number 2 is do not leave it in a mattress, as they used to say, but basically don't leave this in cash. That's not a very safe strategy because literally anything could happen to it. It needs to be in some type of an electronic account because it's insured by the FDIC up to $250,000, and some accounts are even insured higher. There's no reason for you to have this in cash. Have it in electronic. Number 3, don't put it in a CD or a certificate of deposit. So a certificate of deposit is a type of account that you basically put your money in, and the bank agrees that it will hold this money for a set amount of time, usually between 6 months and 3 years. And over that set amount of time, it will give you a specified APY, and that's the rate that you'll get over that time. Oftentimes, the rates for a CD will be slightly higher than the rates for a high yield savings account. However, the difference we're talking about is usually somewhere in the ballpark of 1.8, 1.9 versus like 2.2. It's not really going to be worth the difference with an emergency fund, at least, because again, you don't want to lock up your money. It needs to be liquid. And then number 4, as I mentioned before, do not have it in a checking account. This is a horrible idea because most checking accounts are going to be giving you basically no interest. So it's essentially getting smaller every year due to inflation, and it's right there for you to spend. The whole point is to have it where you can't and don't want to spend it. That way it's there for you when you need it. So now that I've gone over the 4 things you should never do with an emergency fund, here's what you should do with it. Put it in a high yield savings account. So a high yield savings account is a savings account that is generally with an online bank, and that means that they don't have brick and mortar stores. This allows for them to cut costs, which they then pass on to the consumer in the form of giving you a higher APY. This just means that you get more money back in interest on the amount you have in the account. As an example, most traditional savings accounts will give you 0.1%, which is abysmal. It's basically nothing when you compare it around 2% of inflation, which is already eating away. That 0.1 isn't going to offset it at all. Whereas high interest savings accounts through these online banks are able to offer you interest rates between 1.6 to over 2% depending on the specific account requirements and depending on the rates at the current time. As we speak currently in February of 2020, the best rates are generally around the 1.75 to 1.9 range, and that is awesome when compared to traditional banks. So like I mentioned, when you're looking for a high yield savings account, you're definitely gonna be looking at online banks. Another thing to keep in mind is look for online banks that don't have any maintenance fees. It's 2020. There's no reason for anyone to pay a maintenance fee on a bank account. If you pay a monthly maintenance fee on a bank account, you need to stop right now. There are plenty of options like Ally Bank, Discover It Bank, Wealthfront, Tab that don't charge maintenance fees, and that's because there's no reason for them to. They're making money in other avenues. As a consumer, don't support banks that do this. It's price gouging. Also, pro tip, if you're struggling to figure out how you're going to come up with the money to put in your emergency fund, right now, it's tax season. The average American gets around a $3,000 tax refund. Put that in there. That's a perfect way to start off with your emergency fund, and that is actually how I started my emergency fund. The first time I started building one was I put around a $3,000 refund in there. And if you live in a low cost of living area of the country and you're a young single person, that's very likely to be close to your 3 months of expenses. So this is a great way to get the ball rolling. So don't forget, your highest priority financially should be paying off high interest debt. In general, I consider this to be debt that's over around 4% because this is generally what you're going to get if you have it invested in the stock market. Once you cut back on after taxes, then it's going to be around 4%. So if you're paying more in interest than you are able to gain in interest elsewhere, then that's too high of an interest rate for you to be paying. You need to get rid of that debt. The second priority after paying off that type of debt is an emergency fund. And the third is to start investing so that you can build wealth to set yourself up financially for the future. So no matter where you are in your financial journey, it's vitally important that you minimize your debts and have yourself set up with an emergency fund so that you're able to cover expenses when unexpected costs come up. So guys, that's all for today. Thank you so much for making it to the end of the video. Really appreciate you guys watching. If you're interested in this type of content and you want to work on your financial future, grow your financial literacy, and just learn more about all things personal finance and learn about how to grow and plan a career, definitely subscribe down below so that way you can see my weekly videos. That way we can have you as part of the community, because I really want to increase financial literacy in society, because I know how important it is and I know how much stress that it can create for people, and ultimately I want us all to have less stress and be able to live our best lives. So thank you guys so much for watching, and in the comments below be sure to let me know what you guys are interested in learning more about, and I'll try to make sure I get a video out for you so that way I can serve you better. And in the meantime, be sure to like the video for the YouTube algorithm, and that way we can make sure this content gets seen by more people. And on that note, I will see you guys next time.